Leadership begins with vulnerability speech. We often grow up believing that leadership means having all the answers, that leaders must be strong, unshakable, and always confident. We picture leaders as people who never doubt themselves, never stumble, never show fear. But here's the truth we rarely say out loud. Real leadership doesn't begin with strength. It begins with vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is not oversharing, insecurity, or loss of control. Vulnerability is the courage to show up when there are no guarantees. It is choosing honesty over perfection. It is standing in front of others and saying, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm here and I care. The most effective leaders are not the loudest voices in the room. They are the ones who create safety. Safety for people to speak honestly, to take risks, to admit mistakes, and to grow. And safety is built when leaders go first, when they model openness, humility, and humanity. When leaders hide behind titles, authority, or armor, they may gain compliance, but they lose connection. People may follow instructions, but they won't bring their hearts, creativity, or courage. Vulnerable leadership invites something deeper than obedience. It invites trust. Trust is not built through perfection. It's built through presence, through listening without defensiveness, through owning mistakes instead of blaming others, through saying, I was wrong, and meaning it. These moments don't weaken leadership, they strengthen it. In a world that rewards hustle, image, and certainty, vulnerability feels risky. But the greater risk is leading without it. Because without vulnerability, there is no innovation, no belonging, and no meaningful change. People cannot give their best when they are busy protecting themselves. Leadership begins the moment we choose courage over comfort. The moment we allow ourselves to be seen not as flawless leaders, but as real human beings who are willing to learn, grow, and lead with heart. That is where trust is born. That is where cultures change. And that is where leadership truly begins. 6 key points of the speech. Vulnerability is courage, not weakness. True leadership requires the bravery to be seen without guarantees or perfection. Leaders create safety, not fear. People thrive when leaders build environments of trust, openness, and psychological safety. Connection is stronger than authority. Titles may command obedience, but vulnerability earns trust and loyalty. Trust is built through honesty and ownership. Admitting mistakes and listening openly strengthens credibility and respect. Innovation requires emotional risk. Without vulnerability, teams avoid risks, creativity shuts down, and growth stalls. Leading with heart creates lasting impact. When leaders choose courage over comfort, they inspire belonging, resilience, and change. One, vulnerability is courage, not weakness. For a long time, vulnerability has been misunderstood. We've been taught directly or indirectly that strong leaders show uncertainty, don't admit fear, and definitely don't expose doubt. Strength, we were told, means control. Confidence means certainty. Leadership means never letting them see you sweat. But this belief has quietly done more damage to leadership than almost anything else. Vulnerability is not about falling apart in front of others. It's not about oversharing personal struggles or lacking boundaries. Vulnerability is the willingness to show up fully when the outcome is uncertain. It's choosing courage in moments where hiding would feel safer. It's saying, I don't have all the answers, but I'm committed to finding them with you. At its core, vulnerability is emotional bravery. It requires leaders to step out from behind the armor of perfection and authority and allow themselves to be human. This is not easy. In fact, it may be the hardest thing a leader ever does because it involves risk. The risk of being misunderstood, the risk of being criticized, the risk of being judged as weak. Yet every meaningful act of leadership has always involved risk. When leaders dare to be vulnerable, something powerful happens. They give others permission to do the same. They create space for honesty instead of fear, learning instead of blame, growth instead of shame. A leader who can say, I made a mistake, models accountability. A leader who can say, I don't know yet, models curiosity. And a leader who can say, I need your perspective, models respect. This kind of courage builds trust far more effectively than pretending to be invincible. People don't trust leaders because they are flawless. They trust leaders because they are real. They trust leaders who are consistent, transparent, and willing to stand in discomfort rather than avoid it. Vulnerability turns leadership from a performance into a relationship. Choosing vulnerability also means embracing uncertainty. Leaders are often expected to provide clarity and direction, and they should. But clarity doesn't require pretending certainty where none exists. Honest leadership acknowledges complexity while still moving forward. It says, this is hard, and we'll face it together. In a culture that rewards image and toughness, vulnerability can feel like rebellion. But it is a disciplined, intentional choice. It requires self-awareness, emotional regulation, and a deep commitment to values over ego. Vulnerable leaders don't lead from fear of being exposed. They lead from the courage to be seen. And that is why vulnerability is not weakness. It is strength with its armor removed. It is courage in its most authentic form. It is the foundation upon which trust, connection, and meaningful leadership are built. 2, leaders create safety, not fear. At the heart of great leadership is one essential responsibility: creating safety, not comfort, not control, safety. When people feel safe, they speak honestly, take smart risks, ask for help, and bring their full selves to the work. When they don't, fear takes over, and fear is one of the most expensive emotions in any organization or community. Fear silences voices. It keeps people quiet in meetings, even when they see problems coming. It encourages compliance instead of commitment. People begin to focus less on contributing and more on protecting themselves. In fearful environments, energy is spent on avoiding blame rather than creating solutions. And no matter how talented the individuals are, fear will always limit collective potential. Leaders don't always realize when they are creating fear. It doesn't require yelling threats or punishment. Sometimes fear is created through subtle behaviors: shutting down questions, reacting defensively to feedback, rewarding perfection instead of learning, or making people feel small when they make mistakes. Even silence can be frightening when people don't know where they stand. Safety begins when leaders choose curiosity over control. Instead of asking, who's responsible for this mistake, they ask, what can we learn from this? Instead of demanding certainty, they invite dialogue. Instead of assuming authority must always speak first, they listen. These moments send a powerful signal: you are allowed to be human here. Creating safety does not mean lowering standards or avoiding accountability. In fact, the safest environments often have the highest expectations. The difference is how those expectations are held. Safe leaders challenge people while still respecting them. They separate the person from the problem. They make it clear that mistakes are part of growth, not a measure of worth. When leaders create safety, trust begins to grow, and trust is the foundation of high-performing teams. Trust allows people to disagree without fear of retaliation. It allows innovation to flourish because risk is no longer punished, it is supported. It allows people to admit when they're struggling before burnout or failure takes over. Safety is also built through consistency. Leaders who are unpredictable, warm one day and harsh the next, keep people on edge. But leaders who respond with steadiness, fairness, and transparency create an environment where people can relax into their work. When energy isn't spent managing fear, it can be invested in creativity, collaboration, and excellence. Perhaps most importantly, safety begins with the leader's own vulnerability. When leaders admit they don't have all the answers, ask for feedback, and respond thoughtfully rather than defensively, they model the behavior they want to see. They show that courage is welcome and that honesty will be met with respect. Leadership is not about being the most powerful person in the room. It's about being the person who makes the room feel safe enough for everyone else to show up fully. And when leaders choose safety over fear, they don't just lead better, they unlock the best in others. 3, connection is stronger than authority. Many leaders are taught to rely on authority to lead. Authority comes from titles, positions, experience, or hierarchy. It gives the power to make decisions, assign tasks, and enforce rules. Authority can create order, but connection creates commitment. And leadership that relies only on authority may function, but it rarely inspires. People can be managed through authority, but they cannot be truly led without connection. When leadership is reduced to commands and compliance, something essential is lost. People may do what is required, but they hold back their ideas, their creativity, and their emotional investment. They follow instructions, not purpose. Connection begins when leaders see people as human beings rather than resources. It's the willingness to know who people are beyond their roles, to listen without rushing to fix, and to recognize that everyone carries unseen pressures, fears, and hopes. This doesn't require becoming overly personal. It requires being present and respectful. Authority creates distance. Connection closes it. When leaders lead from a place of separation, I decide, you execute, they reinforce hierarchy at the cost of trust. But when leaders invite participation, ask for perspectives, and genuinely consider input, they create shared ownership. People support what they help create. Connection also strengthens influence. Leaders who are connected don't need to constantly remind others of their power. Their influence comes from credibility and care. When people feel respected and valued, they are more willing to stretch, adapt, and commit even during uncertainty or change. They don't follow because they have to, they follow because they want to. One of the greatest misconceptions in leadership is that connection weakens authority. In reality, it transforms it. Connected leaders don't abandon boundaries or decision making. They simply lead with empathy alongside clarity. They can hold difficult conversations without humiliation. They can enforce standards without demeaning people. They can say no without breaking trust. Connection requires vulnerability. It asks leaders to step down from the illusion of superiority and meet people eye to eye. This doesn't mean giving up leadership. It means redefining it. It means leading with influence rather than intimidation, with presence rather than pressure. In moments of challenge, connection matters most. During uncertainty, people don't look to authority for comfort. They look for reassurance, honesty, and steadiness. Leaders who have built connection can guide people through discomfort because trust already exists. Without connection, authority feels cold and distant when it's needed most. Ultimately, leadership is not about power over people. It's about impact with people. Authority may open doors, but connection keeps people walking through them together. The strongest leaders are not those who demand loyalty, but those who earn it through respect, empathy, and shared purpose. Connection doesn't replace authority, it gives it meaning. And when leaders choose connection first, they don't just lead effectively, they lead in a way people remember, respect, and willingly follow. 4, trust is built through honesty and ownership. Trust is the invisible currency of leadership. You can't demand it, announce it, or fast track it. Trust is built slowly, moment by moment, through what leaders say, what they do, and just as importantly, what they choose not to hide. At the center of trust lies honesty and ownership. Many leaders believe trust is earned by appearing confident and in control. But people don't trust leaders because they look flawless. They trust leaders who are truthful, consistent, and willing to take responsibility when things go wrong. Ownership signals integrity. It tells people, you matter enough for me to be accountable. Honesty in leadership doesn't mean sharing every thought or emotion. It means speaking truthfully, even when the truth is uncomfortable. It means giving clear expectations instead of vague reassurance. It means addressing problems directly rather than avoiding conflict. Leaders who communicate honestly reduce anxiety because people no longer have to guess where they stand. Ownership becomes most visible in moments of failure. When leaders blame others, deflect responsibility, or make excuses, trust erodes quickly. People may stay silent, but they are always watching. On the other hand, when leaders say, "This is on me," something powerful happens, blame dissolves, learning begins, respect grows. Owning mistakes doesn't weaken authority, it strengthens credibility. It shows emotional maturity and confidence. Leaders who take responsibility demonstrate that accountability is not punishment, but a pathway to growth. This creates a culture where people are more willing to admit errors early when they can still be corrected. Trust is also built through consistency. Leaders who change standards depending on mood, pressure, or convenience create confusion and skepticism. But leaders who act in alignment with their values, even when it's difficult, build reliability. People may not always agree with decisions, but they can respect them when they are fair and transparent. Honesty also requires listening. Leaders who want trust must be willing to hear hard feedback without becoming defensive. This doesn't mean agreeing with every opinion. It means acknowledging perspectives and responding with respect. When people feel heard, even tough decisions feel more acceptable. Ownership extends beyond individual actions to collective outcomes. Trustworthy leaders don't take all the credit when things go well or disappear when challenges arise. They stand with their teams in success and struggle alike. They say, "we," more than I, and they protect dignity even under pressure. Ultimately, trust is built when leaders align words with actions. Promises kept matter more than promises made. Apologies followed by change matter more than apologies alone. Over time, honesty and ownership create a foundation strong enough to hold difficult conversations, bold decisions, and meaningful change. Leadership without trust is fragile. Leadership rooted in honesty and ownership is resilient. It doesn't depend on image or control, it depends on integrity. And that is the kind of trust that lasts. 5, innovation requires emotional risk. Innovation is often talked about as a technical skill, better strategies, smarter tools, faster systems. But at its core, innovation is emotional before it is intellectual. It requires people to offer ideas that might fail, challenge existing norms, and step into the unknown. And none of that happens without emotional risk. In environments driven by fear, innovation quietly dies. People stop suggesting new approaches because they've learned that mistakes are punished, questions are unwelcome, or failure is remembered longer than success. Over time, teams become efficient, but not creative. They repeat what is safe, not what is possible. Emotional risk means being willing to be wrong in public. It means sharing an unfinished idea. It means questioning long-standing practices. These actions make people vulnerable because they expose judgment, criticism, and rejection. Without strong leadership support, the cost of speaking up feels too high. Leaders play a decisive role in whether innovation survives or shuts down. When leaders react to failure with blame or disappointment, they send a clear message: play it safe. But when leaders respond with curiosity, asking what was learned rather than who is at fault, they redefine failure as feedback. This shift changes everything. Innovation thrives where learning is valued more than perfection. Leaders who celebrate effort, experimentation, and progress, even when results fall short, create momentum. They make it clear that growth is more important than ego. This doesn't mean ignoring outcomes or accepting poor performance. It means recognizing that breakthrough ideas often come after multiple attempts. Emotional risk also requires psychological safety. People need to know that their worth is not tied to being right every time. When leaders consistently support respectful disagreement and welcome diverse perspectives, they unlock creativity. Different voices lead to better solutions, but only when those voices feel safe enough to speak. One of the most powerful leadership behaviors is modeling emotional risk. When leaders admit uncertainty, share lessons from their own failures, or ask for input, they demonstrate that vulnerability and innovation go hand in hand. They show that leadership is not about having all the answers, it's about asking better questions. Innovation also demands patience. New ideas can be messy, uncomfortable, and slow to develop. Leaders who expect instant success often shut down experimentation too early. But leaders who allow space for iteration give ideas time to mature. They understand that meaningful change rarely arrives fully formed. In rapidly changing environments, the greatest risk is not emotional vulnerability, it is stagnation. Organizations that avoid risk may feel stable in the short term, but they become fragile over time. Innovation keeps systems adaptable, resilient, and alive. Ultimately, innovation is an act of courage. It asks people to imagine something better and risk being wrong along the way. Leaders who protect and encourage that courage don't just create new ideas, they create cultures where growth is possible. 6. Leading with heart creates lasting impact. Leadership that leaves a lasting impact is rarely remembered for metrics alone. People may forget the exact strategies, numbers, or plans, but they never forget how a leader made them feel. Leading with heart means recognizing that leadership is not just about outcomes, it is about people. And people are moved by care, meaning, and authenticity. Leading with heart begins with empathy. It's the ability to understand, not necessarily agree with, what others are experiencing. Empathy allows leaders to respond with compassion rather than judgment, especially in moments of struggle. It creates a sense of belonging, reminding people that they are valued not just for what they produce, but for who they are. This kind of leadership does not avoid difficulty. Leading with heart does not mean being soft or indecisive. In fact, it often requires more courage. It means having hard conversations while protecting dignity. It means holding people accountable while offering support. It means making tough decisions without losing humanity in the process. Leaders who lead with heart create environments where people feel seen and respected. In such spaces, motivation becomes intrinsic. People don't work hard out of fear or obligation. They work hard because they care. They care about the mission, the team, and the leader who has shown them respect and trust. Lasting impact is built through consistency. Leading with heart is not a single grand gesture, it is a daily practice. It's how leaders respond to stress, how they treat people when no one is watching, and how they handle power. Over time, these small moments shape culture more than any formal policy ever could. Leading with heart also requires self-awareness. Leaders must understand their own values, triggers, and fears. When leaders are emotionally aware, they are less reactive and more intentional. They can pause before responding, choose curiosity over defensiveness, and align actions with values, even under pressure. One of the most powerful legacies a leader can leave is the growth of others. Leaders who lead with heart invest in people's development, confidence, and courage. They don't hoard power, they share it. They don't seek admiration, they cultivate capability. And long after they are gone, their influence lives on in the people they helped grow. In times of uncertainty, people look to leaders not just for direction, but for reassurance. Leaders who lead with heart provide steadiness without false certainty. They offer hope without denial. They remind people that even in difficulty, they are not alone. Ultimately, leadership is not measured by control or status. It is measured by impact. And the deepest, most enduring impact comes from leaders who choose courage, compassion, and connection. When leaders lead with heart, they don't just achieve results, they change lives. Conclusion, leadership begins with vulnerability. Leadership is not about having all the answers. It is about having the courage to ask the right questions. Throughout this conversation on leadership and vulnerability, one truth has remained constant: meaningful leadership begins when we are willing to show up as we are, not as who we think we should be. Vulnerability is not a liability. It is the doorway to trust, connection, and growth. When leaders allow themselves to be seen, they give others permission to do the same, creating environments where honesty replaces fear and learning replaces blame. We've explored how leaders shape culture through the emotional climate they create. When leaders prioritize safety over fear, people stop protecting themselves and start contributing fully. When connection is valued more than authority, teams move from compliance to commitment. These choices are not always easy, especially in systems that reward control and perfection. But leadership that avoids discomfort ultimately avoids progress. Trust, as we've seen, is built through honesty and ownership. It grows when leaders align words with actions, take responsibility for mistakes, and communicate with clarity and respect. Trust is not formed in grand moments. It is built in the everyday decisions to be transparent, fair, and accountable. And once trust exists, teams become resilient enough to face challenges and courageous enough to innovate. Innovation itself demands emotional risk. New ideas require people to speak up, challenge norms, and risk failure. Without psychological safety and supportive leadership, innovation cannot survive. Leaders who embrace vulnerability and curiosity create cultures where creativity flourishes and growth becomes possible. In a world that is constantly changing, the willingness to learn and adapt is no longer optional, it is essential. Finally, leading with heart is what gives leadership its lasting impact. Long after titles fade and roles change, people remember leaders who treated them with dignity, empathy, and respect. Leaders who led with heart didn't just achieve results, they developed people, strengthened communities, and left something meaningful behind. Leadership at its best is not about power or position. It is about courage, compassion, and connection. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on what leadership can truly be. Thank you for your openness, your curiosity, and your willingness to lead differently. Wherever you lead, at work, at home, or in your community, remember this: leadership begins with vulnerability, and the bravest thing you can do is show up with heart. Goodbye, and keep leading with courage.